Hi, welcome to this SQL tutorial video, and today I'm doing a video that is an introduction to tables. I do plan on doing a couple of these videos, starting with this introduction and then going into more advanced options in other videos. But let's look at the beginning, let's look at the introduction to tables. So a table is the object that stores the data in a database. You have rows and columns in a table, and each of those rows will store a particular type of data. So you can see here we've got numeric data, we've got text, we've got XML data. There's also date and time information that we can store in there. When you've created a table with those rows, then you start adding columns, with those columns rather, then you start adding rows of information to those tables. So when you look at a database, it will already have tables in there, I imagine. But if you need to create your own, this is how we do it. So the syntax to create your table is to simply type create table. You see that command has gone blue. Next we need to give our table a name, and we can call it pretty much anything we like. So in this case I want to call it my table. And then what every table needs is at least one column. So let's give it a column. And you give it a column by starting with standard regular brackets, decide on a column name, and in this case I'll say column 1. You then need to give this column a data type. Now I have previously talked about data types in another video, I'll put a link to it, but every column's got to have a data type. It's got to store a particular type of data. So let us in this case say it's going to be an integer, and then we close that off with a single quotes bracket, and if I execute that, we'll create a table. The table, by the way, is getting created in whatever database that we've got selected here by default. There's kind of ways of changing that, but by default, if I've just selected or just written create table and a table name, it'll get created in this database here. So if I can now say select star from, oh there you go, my table, and if I execute that, it hasn't done anything. It's showing here column 1 because that is the column name. We haven't put any data in, so it's got nothing to show you, but that it will show, that proves that the table does exist. If I try and create that table again with the same name, I'll get an error saying you can't do that. We've already got a table in here called my table. You've got to choose a different name, or get rid of that table and create it again. So what I want to do is I want to add more columns to my table. Right now, the easiest way for me to do this is just to drop the table and recreate it. If I had data in my table, that would be slightly different. That would add more complications to it. But right now, because it is just simply a blank table, I'm going to get rid of the table and start from scratch. And we do that by typing drop table and the name of the table. Oops. And if I highlight that and click execute, it drops that table, and then if I try and select from it, it doesn't know what that is. So let's think about adding more columns to our table. So I'm going to change the way this, I'm going to just change ever so slightly just to kind of make it easy to read. So there's column 1. If we want to add more columns, then we need to separate them by a comma, like you would do in a select statement. So what I want to do is I want to change this column name maybe to be int column, and then we'll do, I want to put the comma here, char column, and we'll call it char 1. Now if I create that table, and if I select star from that table, we now see that we're getting 2 columns, one int column, one char column. And we can finish that off by saying varchar column, which we'll say is 50 characters big and date time column, which is a date time. All of that will be accepted. If I try and create that again, I still need to drop it, so I still got that error. But I can now, if I just put, if I just type go between my drop table and my create table, I should be able to run these two, and it drops it and creates it. There we go. So there's our table. Now we do have kind of rules that we need to follow when we're doing naming our columns. So what we cannot do is we cannot have spaces generally in it. So we can't have we can't do that, because it sees this as the column name and then it tries to do column as the data type, which is not correct. But if we do want that to be this space column, we can surround them by square brackets and that will be accepted. If I just run the whole lot, there we have this column now, and we can reference that. But because it's got a space, it's got to be referenced with square brackets. We could call this column, but that's kind of complicated. Now, he doesn't like it because it sees column, it recognizes column as a specific object in SQL. So in order to do that, you're going to have to surround it by square brackets. And there's our column, but it kind of complicates things when you start using recognized SQL objects. So if I were to do substring, which is a function, yes, I could have a column called substring, but when it comes to referencing that column, you've always, you've got to separate it with surrounded by square brackets, and it just adds complexity. So really, you're better off having a non-recognized word as a column name. So I'll delete that, and we'll just run this again. Now we've got our 4 columns. Now let's look at putting some data in our columns. So I'm just going to, I'll leave that where it is. So in order to put some data in your columns, you start with insert into, and then you give it a table name. Now, following insert into my table, or insert into table name, if you put a bracket, you can then tell it what columns you're going to insert into. In this example, I don't need to do that, but it's good practice to get into. So if I start typing, it's going to say, oh, I know what that is. It's int column. And then if I start typing, so I can do that. And it's good practice to do that. So I'm going to say insert into my table into these specific columns, and then I'm going to give it some data to put in. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to get rid of that. Insert into my table, and then you've got to type values, and then in quotes you give it values. Now we've got data types to think about here. So without me giving it a list of columns, it's going to expect data in all these 4 columns in that order. So the first one is a number, so I'll put number 1. The second one is a single character, so because it's a character, it's got to be surrounded by single quotes. The third one is a character as well, so I'll put in here 1, and then the fourth one is a date time, so we'll just put, and then close brackets. So I can insert into my table these values, and if I do a select, we now see it. Now I can insert into this table more than those values. So if I were to, if I want to insert more than one set of rows, I, like anything else, separated with columns, with commas rather. So if I just copy that, and I'm just going to copy and paste it again, I'll change that to 2, I'll change that to 3, change that to B, I'll change that to C, and 2, and 3, and then that's going to be the second, and that's going to be the third. Now I've already got a row in here, so when I insert this lot, it's going to insert that first row a second time, but that's okay. So insert into it, so it's inserted 3 rows, and when we do our select, We've now got 4 rows, 1 initially and then a further 3. Okay, that's working pretty well. Now let's have a think about a couple of other things. So this column here, I want this column to be unique and I want it to grow one at a time like I'm doing here, 1, 2, 3. SQL can deal with that for you. So in order to do this, you need to change your int column to be an identity column, and to do that we add the word identity, and then in brackets it expects 2 values, and in this case I'm going to do this. The first value here, this first one, is the beginning number, the number to start at. So when you put your first row in, it's going to have whatever this number is, in this case 1, and this second number is what it's going to iterate by. So right now I'm going to say, create me this table. When you insert in rows, insert the first at number 1, and the second one was going to be starting here and iterating by this value, so it's going to be 2. So let me show you this as an example. So we've still got 4 columns, but because we've got this identity column, if I try and insert here, I'm going to get an error. And it's saying I can't insert into an identity column. It's an identity column for a reason. You have no, as a SQL user, I've got no control over it in this way. I mean, I do have a little bit of control over it, but not for this video. So what I want to do is, what I need to do is just remove any reference to my identity column. So I'll do that. So SQL now doesn't want to know about that first column. It will deal with it. It doesn't want me to think about it. So I should be able to run this fine. And when I run my select, you can see you've got 1, 2, and 3. So now let's drop our table. Actually, before I do, I want to change these values to be 5 and iterate 10. So what I'm expecting here is the first row to be 5, the second row to be 5 plus this value 10, the third row to be plus 10 again. So if we drop this and then we insert our values again, you can see it begins at 5 and it iterates through 10 and 10 again. So that's how the identity column works. Generally, as standard, it'd be 1 and 1, but you can do what you like, whatever kind of suits. Okay, this next thing I want to look at is adding a default. So right now we've got this column here that is coming in as the 1st of Jan 2022. I don't want it to come in as a value selected. I want to come in as at the date and time that the row was inserted. So if I do, there's something called getDate. GetDate is a function that returns the date and time, the current date and time. If I actually just run select getDate, you can see there 12:49 and 55 milliseconds. If I run it again, 12:49 and 59. If I run it again, 12:50. So whenever I execute this, date time is returned at the precise moment that you run your command. So I want to use that. So I'm going to take that, and here I'm going to put default getDate. I could default it to a particular date. I could give it a date, or I'll let SQL do it for me. So default to getDate. So when a column's inserted, it will have an identity column automatically created, and it will put in the date and time that the value was added. So let us now delete this, and we need to slightly alter our SQL statement down here. So if I get rid of this, we don't want it to insert any more dates. We want it to use the default. Now when I run this, I think I will get an error. Excuse me. Right, so I've got an error. What it's saying is, you've given me 2 columns here, but I know there's 3. Even though one's got a default, I'm still expecting 3 columns. Okay, so in brackets, we now put in our columns. our column names. We're inserting into the char column and the varchar column. So if I put those two in brackets here, SQL will look at that and think, okay, so I'm inserting data into char column and into varchar column. I'll try and deal with the rest of it. And it can, because it's got a default. So now if we look at this, we've got 12:51 and 40 milliseconds. And if I were to run my insert again and just insert those 3 columns again, and we look, we now have 6 columns, you can see 12:51 and 52 milliseconds. So the precise date time gets inserted into that column. I think that's the end of the video, this one. Like I said, I'll be doing another one shortly, but until then, I hope you found this interesting. Any comments or queries, please leave them, and thanks a lot for your time. See you next time.